The space station floated silently in the darkness between stars. It was called Horizon's Edge, and it belonged to no single species. The Galactic Council had built it as a meeting place, a neutral ground where different races could learn about each other without the complications of territory or history. Stood at the observation window, watching the planet below. Prime was a world of deep forests and tall mountains, painted in shades of green and brown. Somewhere down there lived a species she had studied for 3 years but never met in person. Her heart beat faster just thinking about it. She was not a soldier. She was not a diplomat. Was a scientist who studied alien life. She had spent most of her career in laboratories and libraries, reading reports and watching recordings. Now, for the first time, she would live among an alien species. The thought was terrifying and exciting in equal measure. The door behind her slid open with a soft hiss. Captain walked in, his boots clicking against the metal floor. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes, and he had been commanding officer for 5 years. She trusted him completely. "You look nervous," he said, standing beside her at the window. "I am nervous," admitted. "They are apex predators. They evolved to hunt and kill. Every report says they view other species as either threats or prey, and I am supposed to work with their children." Smiled. "That is exactly why you were chosen. Because I am small and weak, and they will not see me as a threat. Because you raised 3 younger siblings after your parents died. Because you volunteered at children's hospitals during the war. Because every child you have ever met has loved you." Turned to look at her. "The Council does not need a warrior for this mission. They need someone who understands children, someone who can make anyone feel safe." Looked back at the planet, even apex predators. Especially apex predators, they are the ones who need it most. The shuttle ride down to the station took 20 minutes, spent most of it reviewing her notes on culture. They were a proud species, deeply connected to their traditions. Their society was built on strength and dominance. Every interaction was a test, a chance to prove your worth. They did not understand weakness, and they did not forgive it. The youth education program was relatively new. They had only achieved spacefaring status 50 years ago, and they were still learning how to interact with other species. The Galactic Council had suggested cultural exchange programs, and they had reluctantly agreed. But they had made one thing clear from the start: no prey species would be allowed near their children. Humans were different. Humans were also predators, persistent hunters who had once chased their prey across endless plains until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. They did not respect humans, but they did not dismiss them either. That small opening was all the Council needed. The shuttle landed smoothly, gathered her bags and stepped out into the arrival hall. The air was warmer than she expected, and it carried a strange scent, something like pine and copper mixed together. She would later learn that this was the natural smell of. They were waiting for her. Had seen pictures and videos, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. They were huge. The smallest adult in the room was at least 2 meters tall, with broad shoulders and thick limbs covered in short, dense fur. Their colors ranged from deep black to golden brown, with patterns of stripes and spots that were unique to each individual. Their faces were feline, with pointed ears, flat noses, and mouths full of teeth designed for tearing flesh. But it was their eyes that caught her attention. Large, golden, with vertical pupils that seemed to glow in the artificial light. Predator eyes. Hunter eyes. Eyes that looked at her and saw something small and soft and easy to kill. Took a deep breath and walked forward. They did not move. They watched her approach with the stillness of cats observing a mouse. She could feel their gazes on her skin, measuring her, judging her. She kept her pace steady and her head high. She had read that showing fear was the worst thing you could do around. It triggered their hunting instincts. She stopped in front of the largest, a male with dark gray fur and a scar running across his muzzle. He was clearly the leader here. His presence filled the room like a physical weight. "I am," she said, bowing respectfully. "I am honored to meet you. I hope I can be useful during my time here." The gray stared at her for a long moment. His nostrils flared as he took in her scent. Then he spoke, his voice a deep rumble that felt in her chest. "You are small." "Yes," agreed. "You are soft." "Yes." "You do not look like a predator." Met his eyes. It was difficult. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to look away, to submit, to run. But she held his gaze and said, "Looks can be deceiving." Something flickered in this expression. It might have been surprise, it might have been interest, could not tell. "I am," he said finally. "I am the keeper of the youth hall. You will work under my supervision. You will follow our rules. You will not interfere with traditions." "I understand." "Do you?" Leaned closer. His breath was hot on her face and she could see every detail of his fangs. "We are not like the weak species you have met before. We do not need comfort or kindness. We are warriors. Our children are warriors. We will make them strong and you will not get in the way." Did not step back. "I am not here to get in the way. I am here to learn and to help however I can." Studied her for another moment. Then he straightened and turned away. "Follow me. I will show you to your quarters." The youth hall was located in the eastern section of the station. It was a large complex with training rooms, sleeping areas, and common spaces. Everything was built for bodies, which meant the ceilings were high and the furniture was oversized. Felt like a child walking through a giant's house. Her quarters were small but comfortable. A bed, a desk, a bathroom. The walls were bare metal and there was no window. She did not mind. She had lived in worse places. "The cubs will arrive tomorrow morning," said from the doorway. "You will observe only. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not touch the cubs. Do not interfere with their training." "What will they be learning?" asked. His eyes narrowed. The owl. Knew that word. It was in her research notes. The predator stare. A dominance display meant to intimidate prey and rivals. It was one of the most important skills a young could learn. "I look forward to seeing it," she said. Made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You will not enjoy it, human. The owl is not meant to be enjoyed. It is meant to make you afraid." He turned and walked away, his claws clicking against the floor. "Sleep well. Tomorrow you will understand what you have gotten yourself into." The door closed behind him. Sat on the edge of her bed and let out a long breath. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was still racing, but beneath the fear she felt something else. Excitement, curiosity, hope. She had spent her whole life taking care of others. Siblings, patients, students. She knew what it meant to face something frightening and find the courage to stay. She knew that even the fiercest creatures could learn to trust if you gave them enough time and enough patience. Tomorrow she would meet the cubs. Tomorrow she would begin. Lay down and closed her eyes. Sleep came slowly, but when it finally arrived, she dreamed of golden eyes and soft fur and children who had never known kindness. She would change that. The morning came too quickly. Woke to the sound of a chime, a gentle tone that filled her small room and then faded away. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, gathering her courage. Then she got up, washed her face, and put on her uniform. The youth hall was already busy when she arrived. Adults moved through the corridors with purpose, their claws clicking against the floor in a rhythm that was beginning to find familiar. They ignored her completely, which she took as a good sign. Being ignored was better than being threatened. Was waiting for her outside the main training room. He looked tired, as if he had not slept well, wondered if she was the cause. "The cubs are inside," he said without greeting. "Remember what I told you, observe only." Nodded and followed him through the door. The training room was enormous. High ceilings, padded floors, walls lined with equipment she did not recognize, but barely noticed any of it. Her attention was captured entirely by the cubs. There were 12 of them, ranging in age from about 6 to 10 standard years. They were smaller than the adults, of course, but still larger than. Their fur was softer, fluffier, not yet grown into the sleek coats of maturity. Their eyes were the same golden color as the adults, but there was something different in them, something curious, something young. They noticed her immediately. 12 pairs of golden eyes turned toward the door, 12 small bodies went still. Could feel their attention like a physical pressure. "Cubs," announced, his voice echoing through the room, "this is the human I told you about. She will be observing your training for the next several months. You will ignore her. She is not important." Kept her expression neutral. She had expected something like this. The cubs did not seem convinced. They continued to stare at her, their ears swiveling forward with interest. One of them, a small female with light brown fur, whispered something to the cub beside her. The second cub made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Enough," growled. "Today we continue your owl training. Line up." The cubs obeyed, forming a row in front of their instructor. Moved to the side of the room and found a spot against the wall where she could watch without being in the way. The training began. Demonstrated the predator stare first, turning to face a training dummy on the far side of the room. His eyes narrowed. His pupils expanded until they were almost entirely black. A low growl built in his chest, rising in volume until it seemed to fill the entire space. His lips pulled back, revealing row after row of gleaming teeth. Felt her body react instinctively. Her heart rate spiked. Her muscles tensed. Every primitive part of her brain screamed at her to run, to hide, to do anything except stay in the presence of this predator. She stayed. Held the stare for several seconds, then relaxed. That is the owl. It is the weapon of our ancestors. Before we had ships and technology, we had this. The stare that freezes prey. The stare that breaks the will of rivals. You must master it if you wish to be true. The cubs nodded seriously. They had been learning this skill since they could walk, but mastery took years. It required control of every muscle in the face, every sound in the throat. It required the ability to project killing intent without actually killing. "Now," said, "practice on the dummies. I will observe and correct." The cubs spread out across the room, each finding a dummy to face. Watched them work, fascinated despite her fear. They were so young, so serious. They threw themselves into the exercise with total dedication, their small faces twisting into expressions of predatory fury. But they kept looking at her. Noticed it happening again and again. A cub would begin their stare, hold it for a moment, then glance toward the strange human standing against the wall. They were curious. They could not help it. She was the most interesting thing in the room. After about an hour, called for a break. The cubs gathered around a water station, drinking and talking among themselves. Stayed where she was, not wanting to intrude. The small female with light brown fur broke away from the group. She walked toward with the careful, deliberate steps of someone trying to appear casual. Her name, would later learn, was. "You are the human," said. It was not a question. "Yes," replied. "Why are you here?" Considered the question. "I am here to learn about your people, and maybe to help if I can." Tilted her head, a gesture that looked almost dog-like. "Help how? You are small, you are not strong. What can you do?" "I am not sure yet," admitted. "I am still figuring that out." Seemed to accept this answer. She studied for a moment longer, then asked, "Are you afraid of us?" It was the question had been expecting since she arrived. She knew the correct answer was no, never, fear is weakness. But was not, and she did not believe in lying to children. "A little," she said honestly. "You are very impressive, but I am not so afraid that I want to leave." His ears flicked. This was clearly not the answer she expected. Before she could respond, his voice cut across the room. "Return to training." The cub flinched and hurried back to her position. But she glanced over her shoulder at one more time, and there was something new in her golden eyes. Something like respect. The training continued. The cubs practiced their stares on the dummies, then on each other, then on himself. He was a harsh instructor, quick to criticize and slow to praise, but noticed that he was also patient. He corrected mistakes carefully, explaining what went wrong and how to fix it. He never raised a hand against the cubs, never threatened them with anything worse than disappointment. He cared about them, could see it in the way he watched them, the way his voice softened just slightly when he spoke to the younger ones. He was hard because he believed hardness was what they needed, but underneath that hardness was something gentler. Near the end of the session, something changed. The cubs began looking at more frequently, whispering among themselves. She could feel a decision being made, though she did not know what it was. Then, without warning, one of the cubs broke away from the group and walked directly toward her. He was the largest of the cubs, a male with dark fur and serious eyes. His name was. He stopped about 2 meters away from and stared at her. Then he performed the owl. His eyes narrowed, his pupils expanded. A growl rumbled from his chest, deeper than would have expected from someone so young. His lips pulled back to show his teeth, and for a moment he looked exactly like the predator his species was meant to be. His body screamed at her to react, to flinch, to step back, to show the fear that every prey animal had felt since the beginning of time. Instead, she tilted her head and looked at him closely, really looked. She saw the concentration in his face, the effort he was putting into the display. She saw the way his ears trembled slightly with the strain of holding the expression. She saw the hope in his eyes, buried deep beneath the performance of fierceness. He wanted to impress her. He wanted to show her what he could do. Smiled. It was not a forced smile or a nervous smile. It was the warm, genuine smile she had given to hundreds of children before. The smile that said, "I see you, and I think you are wonderful." "Oh," she said softly, "you are so cute." The growl stopped. The expression faltered. His ears flicked backward in confusion. Behind him, the other cubs had gone silent. They stared with wide eyes, clearly unable to process what they had just witnessed. "That was very impressive," continued, keeping her voice gentle and warm. "You have been practicing hard, I can tell. How long did it take you to learn to make that sound?" Did not answer. He seemed frozen, caught between his training and something entirely new. Pushed forward from the group. "You were supposed to be scared," she said, her voice high with confusion. "That is what happens, prey gets scared." "I am not prey," said gently. "And neither are you predators, not really. You are children, you are learning, and I think you are doing a wonderful job." She looked around at all of them, meeting each pair of golden eyes in turn. "I know I am strange to you. I know you do not understand why I am here, but I promise you I am not your enemy. I am just someone who wants to get to know you. Is that okay?" The cubs exchanged glances. They did not know what to say. No one had ever talked to them like this before. In the corner of the room, watched in silence, his expression was unreadable. But he did not stop her. And that thought was a start. 3 weeks passed and everything changed. At first the changes were small. A cub would glance at during training, then quickly look away. Another would walk a little closer to her spot against the wall, pretending to stretch or adjust their position. Started saying hello each morning, a quick word that she whispered as she passed by, too quiet for to hear. Then the changes became bigger. It started with the predator stare. Every day at least one cub would approach and perform their best owl. They put everything they had into it, their eyes burning, their growls echoing off the walls, and every day responded the same way. She smiled. She complimented their technique. She asked questions about how they had improved. The cubs did not understand. The owl was supposed to inspire fear. It was the foundation of power, the weapon that had made them rulers of their world. But this small, soft human looked at their fiercest expressions and saw something cute, something worthy of praise rather than terror. It confused them. It frustrated them. and slowly, without realizing it, it fascinated them. Was the first to approach outside of training. It happened on the 15th day during the evening meal. Always ate alone, sitting at a small table in the corner of the dining hall while they gathered in groups around the larger tables. She did not mind. She used the time to review her notes and plan for the next day. She was writing in her notebook when a shadow fell over her table. She looked up and found standing there, holding his food tray. His expression was serious, almost stern, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. "May I sit here?" he asked. Blinked in surprise. "Of course." Sat across from her. He was large enough that his knees pressed against the underside of the table, and he had to hunch forward to fit in the human-sized chair. But he did not complain. He simply arranged his tray and began to eat. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Returned to her notes, though she was no longer really reading them. She was too aware of the cub sitting across from her, too curious about why he had come. Finally broke the silence. "Why are you not afraid?" Set down her pen. "Afraid of what?" "Of us, of our stairs, of everything." His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "The other species run away when we look at them. They flinch. They make sounds of fear, but you just smile. You say we are cute. Why?" Thought carefully about her answer. She could feel that this moment was important, that what she said next would matter. "On my world," she began, "I used to take care of children, little ones who were sick or scared or alone. Some of them had been through terrible things. They would scream and cry and try to push me away. They would do everything they could to seem strong, to seem scary, because they thought that being scary would keep them safe." She paused, remembering. "But I never saw them as scary. I saw them as children who were hurting, children who needed someone to tell them that it was okay to not be strong all the time, that there was nothing wrong with being soft sometimes." Listened without interrupting. His golden eyes were fixed on her face. "When you show me your predator stare," continued, "I do not see a monster. I see a young person who is working hard to learn a difficult skill. I see someone who wants to be seen as strong and capable. That is not frightening to me. That is brave." His ears folded back. It was the expression of deep thought had learned. He was processing her words, turning them over in his mind. "You see us as children," he said finally. "I see you as people," corrected gently. "Young people still learning and growing. There is nothing scary about that. There is something beautiful about it." Did not respond, but something in his expression shifted. The hardness around his eyes softened just a little. The tension in his shoulders eased. Behind them, the dining hall had gone quiet. Looked around and realized that everyone was watching them. The other cubs had stopped eating. Even some of the adults had turned to stare. She felt a flicker of worry. Had she said something wrong? Had she violated some rule she did not know about? Then stood up from her table and walked over. She did not ask permission. She simply sat down next to, pressing her small, furry body against the human's side. "I want to sit here too," she announced. Another cub joined them. Then another. Within minutes, small table was surrounded by cubs, all of them crowding close, all of them looking at her with a new kind of expression. Trust. Watched from across the room. His face was unreadable but could see his claws flexing, a sign of agitation. He did not approve of this. The cubs were becoming attached to an outsider, a prey species, a human. It went against everything he had been taught. But he did not stop them. From that night on, never ate alone again. The cubs competed for seats at her table, arguing over who got to sit closest to her. They asked her questions about Earth, about human customs, about her life before she came to the station. They told her about their families, their dreams, their fears. And slowly, they began to open up in other ways too. It was who first asked to braid her mane, did not know how to braid. Their claws were too large, too sharp for delicate work, but had seen pictures of human hairstyles and she wanted to try something different. Agreed immediately. She sat down in the common room after training and began to work, her small fingers moving through the cub's thick fur with practiced ease. Other cubs gathered to watch, fascinated by the strange human skill. "Does it hurt?" one of them asked. "Not at all," said. Her eyes were half closed, her expression peaceful. "It feels nice, like being groomed but softer." When finished, Smain was arranged in an elaborate pattern of braids and twists. The other cubs crowded around to see, making sounds of admiration. "It is beautiful," said quietly. Beamed, she looked at with something close to worship. "Can you teach me to do this? Can you show me how?" "Of course," said, smiling. "But your claws might make it difficult. We will have to figure something out together." Appeared in the doorway. He had been watching, realized. He always seemed to be watching now, his golden eyes tracking her every movement. "What is this?" he demanded. "Braided my mane," said proudly, turning to show him. "Is it not beautiful?" Stared at the braids. His expression flickered through several emotions, too fast for to read. Then he looked at, and she saw something unexpected in his eyes. Doubt. He was doubting himself, doubting the traditions he had followed his entire life. The cubs were supposed to be hard, fierce, unattached. They were supposed to learn that strength came from within, not from others. But was laughing. She was showing off her braids to the other cubs, her whole body radiating joy. Had never seen her laugh like that before. He had never seen any of the cubs laugh like that. He turned and walked away without saying a word. Watched him go. She understood what he was feeling because she had seen it before, in parents who did not know how to show love, in teachers who believed that harshness was the only path to strength. Was not cruel. He was just doing what he thought was right. But he was beginning to wonder if he might be wrong. That night lay in her bed and thought about the cubs, about's quiet question, about's joyful laughter, about all of them crowded around her table looking at her with trust and hope. She had come here not knowing what she could offer. She had thought she was too small, too soft, too weak to make a difference in a world of predators. But maybe that was exactly what they needed. Not another warrior, not another voice telling them to be hard and fierce and alone. Just someone who saw them for who they really were. Just someone who cared. The Festival of Claws was the most important day in a young's life. It was the day when cubs stood before the elders and demonstrated their mastery of the owl. It was the day when they proved they were worthy of their heritage, worthy of being called true. Had learned about the festival from the cubs. They had been talking about it for weeks, their voices mixing excitement with nervousness. They had practiced harder than ever, pushing themselves to perfect every detail of their predator stare. Even, who usually preferred braiding sessions to training, had thrown herself into the work. The day of the festival arrived cold and gray. The grand hall was decorated with banners showing the symbols of ancient clans, and the air smelled of incense and old traditions. Hundreds had gathered to watch, adults and elders filling every seat, stood at the back of the hall trying to stay out of sight. She had not been invited to attend, had made that clear. The Festival of Claws was a ceremony, sacred and private. Outsiders were not welcome. But the cubs had begged her to come. They had asked again and again, their golden eyes wide with hope. How could she say no? So she stood in the shadows, watching as the cubs lined up before the raised platform where the elders sat. They looked so small compared to the adults, so young and vulnerable. Felt her heart ache with worry and pride. The ceremony began with a speech from the eldest, a female so old that her fur had turned silver and her eyes had clouded with age. She spoke of tradition, of strength, of the sacred duty of every to carry forward the legacy of their ancestors. The cubs listened in respectful silence. Then it was time for the demonstrations. One by one, the cubs stepped forward and performed their owl. They faced the elders with all the fierceness they could summon, their eyes blazing, their growls echoing through the hall. Some were better than others. Some stumbled or lost their concentration, but all of them tried their best. Watched with her hands clasped together, whispering encouragement under her breath even though she knew they could not hear her. Went last. He was the largest of the cubs, and he had been working harder than anyone. He stepped forward with his head high and his shoulders back, every inch the young warrior he was being trained to become. His owl was perfect. His eyes narrowed to deadly slits. His growl shook the air. His fangs gleamed in the torchlight. Even from across the hall felt a shiver run down her spine. The elders nodded in approval. The crowd murmured with appreciation. Had done well. But then something happened that no one expected. A voice rang out from the front rows. "Wait." Everyone turned to look. A massive male had risen from his seat. He was even larger than, with black fur and scars covering his face and arms. His name was, and he was known throughout society as a champion of the old ways. He believed that they had become soft since joining the galactic community, that they had forgotten what made them strong. He believed that outsiders were poison. "Before we continue," said, his voice carrying through the hall, "there is a matter that must be addressed." He turned and pointed directly at, "Why is there a prey species at our sacred ceremony?" The crowd shifted, heads turned. Suddenly, every eye in the hall was on. She felt her heart stop. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to hide, to become invisible. But she forced herself to stay still. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. "She is the human assigned to the youth hall," said, stepping forward. His voice was carefully neutral. "The cubs asked her to attend." The cubs asked, laughed, a harsh sound without warmth. "Since when do cubs decide who attends sacred ceremonies? Since when do we allow prey species to influence our young?" He walked toward, his claws clicking against the stone floor. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship. He stopped just a few meters away from her, close enough that she could see every scar on his face, every gleam of his fangs. "I have heard about you," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The human who smiles at our cubs, the human who calls them cute, the human who teaches them to braid their fur like weak, soft creatures." Said nothing. She could feel her legs trembling, but she kept her face calm. "You have weakened them," continued. "You have infected them with your prey species softness. Look at them now, looking at you with hope in their eyes. That is not the way. That is weakness. That is corruption." He leaned closer, his golden eyes burning into hers. "I will show you what a true looks like. I will remind you of your place." Then he performed the owl. Had read about it in her research. The supreme predator stare, the most powerful dominance display in culture. It combined the basic owl with a roar of challenge, a sound so deep and powerful that it had caused prey species to lose consciousness from pure terror. His eyes blazed like suns. His pupils expanded until they swallowed all light. His body seemed to grow, to expand, to fill the entire hall with his presence. And then the roar came, a sound that shook the walls, that rattled bones, that reached into the deepest parts of her brain where the ancient fear of predators still lived. Every instinct she had screamed at her to fall, to submit, to break. But had faced worse than this. She had sat with dying children and held their hands while they slipped away. She had walked through cities destroyed by war to bring medicine to survivors. She had told her little brother that their parents were never coming home, and she had held him while he cried until he had no tears left. She had looked into the face of death and loss and despair, and she had not broken. She would not break now. Met's gaze, her body shook, her heart pounded, but she did not look away, she did not flinch. She held his eyes with hers and she refused to fall. Then she smiled. It was the same smile she had given to hundreds of frightened children, the same smile she had given to the cubs on their first day, warm, genuine, full of understanding. "You must be very proud of your people," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "To fight so hard to protect your traditions. I understand. I am not here to take anything away from you. I am here to add something. Froze, his roar cut off. His expression shifted from fury to confusion to something could not name. No prey had ever withstood the owl. No prey had ever responded with compassion. The silence stretched on. The entire hall held its breath. Then a small voice rang out from the front rows. "Is not prey." It was. She had broken away from the other cubs and was running toward, her small body moving as fast as it could. She stopped in front of the human and turned to face, her fur bristling, her teeth bared. "She is not prey," repeated, her voice high but fierce. "She is our pack." Was the next to move. He walked forward and stood beside, his own fangs showing. "She made us stronger," he growled. "She made us brave enough to care." One by one, the other cubs joined them. They surrounded in a protective circle, 12 young facing down one of the greatest warriors of their species. Stared at them, his expression was unreadable, the silence stretched on. Then stepped forward. The old instructor looked at the cubs, at. He looked at with her braided mane, and with his fierce eyes, and all the others who had found something in this strange human that they had never found before. "The human stays," said. His voice was quiet but firm. "She has broken no laws. She has shown respect for our traditions, and she has earned the loyalty of our cubs." He met's eyes. "That is not weakness, that is strength of a different kind." The crowd murmured. The elders exchanged glances. Claws flexed, his body tense with barely contained fury. But he could see which way the wind was blowing. He could see the cubs standing together, united in their defense of the human. He could see the keeper of tradition taking her side. He stepped back. His expression was cold, his eyes promising that this was not over. But for now, he retreated. The ceremony continued. The cubs completed their demonstrations. The elders gave their blessings. And through it all, stood surrounded by young who had called her pack. She had never felt more terrified. She had never felt more loved. 1 year had passed since the Festival of Claws. Stood on the surface of Prime for the first time, breathing air that had never been filtered through a space station systems. The wind carried the scent of pine forests and distant mountains, and the sky above was a deep purple, unlike any sky she had seen before. The cubs were no longer cubs. They had graduated from the youth program and begun their transition into adulthood. They were taller now, their fur thicker, their bodies stronger. But their eyes were the same, golden and bright, and full of the same curiosity they had shown on that first day. They had brought her here, to the sacred grove where held their most important ceremonies. It was their way of honoring her, of showing her that she was truly one of them. Walked beside her, her mane arranged in elaborate braids that had become her signature style. In the year since first taught her, braiding had spread among young females like wildfire. There were now dozens of styles and patterns, each with its own meaning and symbolism. Had started something she never expected, a small revolution in fashion. "Are you happy?" asked. Smiled, very happy. "Good," bumped her shoulder against, a gesture of affection she had learned from the human. "You deserve to be happy. You have done so much for us." "I did not do anything special," said. "I just treated you the way I would treat any child, the way anyone deserves to be treated." Shook her head. "That is what made it special. No one had ever treated us that way before." They walked in comfortable silence for a while. The grove was beautiful, filled with ancient trees whose trunks were wider than houses. Sunlight filtered through the purple leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. Was waiting for them at the center of the grove. He had changed the most of all the cubs. He was nearly as tall as an adult now, and his dark fur gleamed with health and strength. But his eyes were still the same, serious and thoughtful and kind. He had become a youth mentor, following in his footsteps. Every day, he worked with a new generation of cubs, teaching them the skills they needed to become true. But he taught them something else too, something new. "She is here," said, turning to face the group of cubs gathered around him. There were 15 of them, all young, all staring with wide golden eyes. "This is," continued, "she is the human I told you about, the one who taught us that strength comes in many forms." The cubs whispered among themselves. They had heard stories about the strange human who smiled at predator stares, who called fierce warriors cute, who had earned the loyalty of an entire generation of youth. "Now," said, a hint of humor in his voice, "who wants to show her your owl?" The cubs surged forward eagerly. One by one they approached and gave her their fiercest looks. Their eyes narrowed, their growls rumbled, their fangs flashed, and smiled at every single one of them. "Oh," she said, just as she had said 1,000 times before, "you are so cute." The cubs faltered, confused. They looked for guidance. He was laughing. "I told you, did you not believe me?" "But she is supposed to be afraid," one of the cubs protested. "She is human," said, coming to stand beside. "Humans do not work the way we expect. That is what makes them special." The cubs gathered around, asking questions, showing off their skills, competing for her attention. It was exactly like the first time, a year ago, except now knew exactly what to do. She sat down on a fallen log and began to braid the mane of the cub closest to her. The others watched in fascination, just as the first generation had watched. "Will you teach us?" they asked. "Of course," said, "but your claws might make it difficult. We will have to figure something out together." Arrived as the sun began to set. He looked older than he had a year ago, his fur graying around the muzzle, his movements slower. But there was a peace in his eyes that had not been there before. He had changed too, they all had. He said, nodding in greeting. She replied, smiling, "It is good to see you." They stood together in silence for a moment, watching the cubs play around's feet, and had joined in, helping the younger ones practice their braiding techniques. "I did not understand," said finally. "When you first arrived, I thought you would weaken them. I thought your softness would make them soft, but I was wrong." He turned to look at her, and there was respect in his golden eyes. Real respect, earned over months of watching her work. "You taught them something we never could," he continued. "You taught them that strength is not just about dominance and fear. It is about connection, about caring for others, about being brave enough to be gentle." Felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them away. "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you know." Nodded. Then, after a moment of hesitation, he reached out and placed his massive clawed hand on her shoulder. It was the first time he had ever touched her. The first time any adult had touched her with kindness. "You are Pack," he said simply, "now and always." The word spread through the grove. Cubs and adults alike turned to look, their expressions filled with surprise and joy. Then, one by one, they began to approach. Each one touched her shoulder. Each one repeated the same words. "You are Pack now and always." Stood in the fading light, surrounded by who had become her family. She thought about her journey, about the fear and doubt and loneliness she had felt when she first arrived. She thought about the children she had loved before, back on Earth, and how they had taught her that kindness was the strongest force in the universe. She had come here not knowing what she could offer. She had thought she was too small, too soft, too weak. But she had been exactly what they needed. Across the galaxy, the news spread. The experiment had been a success. Other predator species began requesting human liaisons of their own. The Galactic Council was amazed. How did humans do it? How did they walk into rooms full of apex predators and emerge having made friends? Captain was asked to explain. He was an old man now, near the end of his career. He thought for a long moment before answering. "Humans evolved as persistence predators," he said. "We do not defeat our enemies through fear or strength. We outlast them. And somewhere along the way, we learned that the best way to outlast something is to love it." On Prime, the sun set behind the mountains, the grove filled with soft purple twilight. The cubs fell asleep in piles, exhausted from a day of playing and learning. Sat among them, his head resting on her lap, his hand touching her arm. She was warm and safe and loved. A new cub stirred and looked up at her with sleepy golden eyes. The cub whispered, "Yes. Can I show you my predator stare tomorrow?" Smiled and stroked the cub's fur. "Of course," she said. "I cannot wait to see how cute it is." The cub made a sound of protest, but it was already fading into sleep. Looked up at the purple sky, at the stars beginning to appear, at the universe that had seemed so vast and frightening when she first left Earth. It did not seem frightening anymore. It seemed full of children waiting to be loved. And she would love them all, one smile at a time.